Hello, and welcome to the Logistics Management Podcast Series. My name is Jeff Berman. I'm Group News Editor for Logistics Management Magazine and also the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group. Today, it's a real pleasure to welcome Mark Baxa to our podcast. Mark serves as President and CEO of the Lombard, Illinois-based Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, more commonly known in the industry simply as CSCMP. Mark was voted into his position in June of 2022 by CSCMP's board of directors and its officers, and he previously served in the position in an interim role before getting the formal president and CEO tag. Over the course of his career, Mark has held various roles, including sales, customer service, logistics, distribution, and global trade operations and compliance. He has also served as vice chairman of the St. Louis University Center of Supply Chain Excellence, and he co-led the Executive Global Supply Chain Certificate Program and is also an adjunct professional instructor there. Mark also completed a 4-year term as global board member for WE Connect or We Connect International, consistent with his belief in the value diversity brings to the supply chain. And he has also facilitated supply chain policy development at both the EU and U.S. federal level, and has taught executive courses at the university level and speaks at many global industry conferences. Hey, Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's great to join you and your listeners today. I'm honored.
It's a real honor to have you. So thanks for that. Mark, we'll start with sort of a top level question, if you will, and that simply would be, how when you look at sort of the current supply chain and logistics landscape, what are some of the things that are top of mind for you? What are the key things you're seeing, noticing, observing, etc.?
Well, one thing that stays the same is that change is always happening when it comes to supply chain. And we find that supply chain leaders and just the community of supply chain practitioners worldwide are continuing to think about ways to adapt and triage current day problems while at the same time looking on the road ahead to do things better, faster, more accurately, and certainly serve customers better. So those things continue to stay in vogue. But underneath that, you think about the iceberg and you can see a little bit above the water, but a whole lot of below the water, right? And what's happening today is the external forces continue to create a lot of pressure on supply chains in terms of the geopolitical challenges we see. Certainly, weather-related incidences are having an impact, specifically currently in the United States, but other places around the world. We're also challenged by a number of different things that are really facing us from the rapid expansion and growth of artificial intelligence and machine learning and the adaptation of these technologies. We're also really faced with a lot of, I would say, opportunities. So problems, but opportunities in the way the workforce is deployed and utilized and the human resource element of what we need in the supply chain. And the frontline workforce is becoming more and more of a topic of conversation as really talent is becoming and has maintained itself as a high concern, but also an opportunity for management within the supply chain. So there's a lot of things going on. But I would kind of envelop all of this in the fact that supply chain is everywhere. In order for it to be everywhere, we must adapt. We must adopt and we must learn, each and every day. And we cannot stop learning. We can't stop innovating. But in the end, in order to do that, we have to remain a certain kind of, if you will, prioritization around core competency and capability building as we learn and grow, not only as individuals in our own careers, but what our chiefs of supply chain are telling us is that all tides must rise. The core competency and capability of supply chains are completely top of mind from each organization we work with. It's a 100% watermark right there. So we're clearly in a place that we can help and certainly support that effort. But that's a snapshot of what I see happening in the supply chain. And there's a lot more we can talk about as you get into some of the more detailed questions I think you'd like to talk about, Jeff. But that's the current snapshot I have.
No, absolutely. And interestingly enough, Mark, you touch on quite a few things that were covered at last month's CSCMP Edge conference in Nashville. I was there as I always am every year. And once again, it was a very, very interesting, detailed educational conference. Obviously it's still all fresh in our minds. It was only a couple weeks back. What was your take on Edge this year? What in for you were the key takeaways? How did you, what was your, I guess, view of Edge looking back now?
Well, if I could put a honest quote forward from so many that in the conclusion of the conference have said, and this ranges from those who are early in their career and even college students, all the way through the chiefs of supply chain that interact with CSCMP and create value by our working relationship together for them. What they said this year, and it's a new mark. I think a new line in the sand has been drawn, and it's a culmination of all the great effort and work that went into building this conference, as it is every year. We stand on three pillars. One is the academic community. This is where they come and interact more so than any other association. Secondly, the practitioners, and of course, the service providers that enable practitioners or BCOs to really do what they need to do each and every day. And the overall feedback that we received is I have a lot of choices, and I'm paraphrasing now, but we have a lot of choices in terms of conferences. Some of them are from for-profit companies, and others are other associations. And by far, this has been the most impressive and the most comprehensive conference I've attended in a long time.
Okay.
And that's the goal. That's really the goal, Jeff. And I'm sure you have your own opinion and observations, and I'd love to hear it. Just candidly, I mean, just tell me what you think. But the 100 sessions we put together, the diversity we used and applied towards our view of general sessions and the leadership that was there, everything from a high school teacher as part of a women's leadership forum panel to Roberto Azeas, who came from Mexico, now leads Mattel's supply chain, to Fawn Weaver, just tremendous as CEO of Uncle Nearest Bourbon, just all of the things that we put together in a comprehensive view. There is no question that the Edge Conference is the model everybody else tries to imitate, but there's only one truth, and that is the Edge Conference itself, because we're unbiased as an association, and we are here to develop and educate and create a networking environment for supply chain professionals throughout their career. So I'm so proud of the volunteers. I'm so proud of the speakers, and certainly the staff of both Agile Business Meeting Events and CSCMP that put this together. There's always things we can improve. Hey, we can put more coffee on the floor and create a better breakfast environment and those kind of things. But we don't come for those things. We come to learn. We come to get educated. We come to really leave the conference unrecognizable with the knowledge that we now have. And that's our goal. So Nashville treated us great. We love the Gaylord Marriott properties, and the 2,000 plus attendees that were there, I think, walked away with something really fantastic. So I couldn't be more proud.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a ton to add. As I mentioned, I attend every year, and I always come back with a full notebook, things to ponder, things to report on, uh, great networking connections, opportunities, etc. So, for selfishly speaking, it meets my needs every year, and I do tend to spend most of my time there at the transportation track session. So that's
Sure.
again where I was most of the time this year. Um, so and you had mentioned it. You had mentioned college students a moment ago, and once again, especially notable in recent years, Mark, there were a fair amount of there's always an increasing number of younger attendees, which is good to see and obviously notable. So the actual question here being, do you think in a way that sort of reflects how more young people are actually and actively getting into supply chain and logistics as a career path? And also, what is your role? What is CSCMP's role in helping to facilitate that?
Well, first, I'm pleased the observation that you made. Back to 2015, I took a group from my company with me to the conference. I'll just tell you the story really quickly. And someone I just really loved on our staff, just so engaging and really eating up everything supply chain. And Maria said to me while we were recapping before we left San Diego, California, and headed back home, She said everything was great, just piled on all kinds of, all kinds of things she experienced. And just, the whole team of the company was, great interaction. We just made it, it was the right place to be. And she said, but Mark, where are all the women? Now that was back in 2015. And I just kind of
Right.
sunk into my chair, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so what you see, things are changing. The workforce is evolving. And look, this is very real. For the leaders in supply chain who are listening to this podcast, if you sent your people to this conference, you made a brilliant decision. But if you didn't, you missed something,
Sure.
right? You missed the development opportunity and the opportunity to say, hey, my boss really cares about me. I'm going to stay with this company. You send your A players to this conference. So yeah, you see what's happening, you see what leaders are doing, but you also see the workforce that's evolving. The boomers are moving out, right? Gen X's and millennials, Gen Z's. You see the population shift happening, and we
Hmm.
want a cross section of people attending the conference, and I think we had a really great view of that this year. What CSCMP is doing to enhance that, look, 24/7, 365 days out of the year, the CSCMP Talent Center, a 501(c)(3), exists for the purpose of building the workforce of tomorrow. And there's a
Hmm.
lot more I could say about that. Where are we headed? We're headed into high schools and teachers that are now teaching supply chain in the business departments of high schools. And we are going to dominate this space. Why? There's 27,000 high schools in the United States alone, Jeff. And of that 27,000, there's 8 million graduates every year. And let me go on record by saying, on behalf of our members and future members and everybody listening, is I want to help you get your unfair share of those 8 million folks every year that
Right.
graduate into your
Right.
supply chain, right?
Yeah.
That's our goal. Because when we go together, we solve a big problem together for a lifetime. But if we go by ourselves, we're solving a problem for a day.
Yeah.
So I want people to join that crusade. You can find a place to donate at the CSCMP website. Just look for the CSCMP Talent Center. But my point is that we are strategically investing in the future of supply chain talent, and that's bleeding over to what you saw in the conference. College students and early in career who have been connected to CSCMP are now in the workforce and are continuing to participate, and their leaders are funding them to go to this conference, among other things.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And just as I guess as a follow-up in a way there, before we dive into some more industry specific topics, Mark, you guys have such a wide range of members, whether it be academics, shippers, carriers, 3PLs, technology services providers, among others. So there's a kind of a big one size fits all almost thing, because you're not just for you're not just an organization for one industry, one mode, etc. um with such a wide range of members, how do you kind of have a collective focus when communicating with and collaborating with your membership? I know that's kind of a long-winded question, but yeah,
That's a great question.
yeah.
It's a great question, but it actually is a short answer. The short answer is it's representative of the ecosystem of the supply chain. Everybody you mentioned in every profession or industry vertical within supply chain that you mentioned, whether BCOs, shippers, service providers, 3PLs, logistics partners, technology, academia, right? Those coming in as students and those leaving as retirees giving back. That whole ecosystem is represented by CSCMP, and that makes the sum of the whole of the supply chain. That's the answer. In terms of bringing everybody together, what's unique about supply chain is everybody wants to learn about everything they possibly can. You must be intellectually curious, and if you are intellectually curious, you will prosper on the road ahead. Coming out of COVID, and I'm not going to talk about COVID, right? I'm just going to talk about coming out of COVID. What people said was, why is it the answers seem to be outside my company as I tried a solution for what I'm facing each and every day? I go to bed on Monday, and Tuesday something else is facing
Yeah.
me, and I got to go outside to find the answer. Look, the bottom line is you can't stop learning, and you must have an evolving learning organization. And when everybody comes together, we come together with one purpose: contributing to the learning and taking the learning. Each and every member is looking for that. And that's what makes it, that's the beauty of the supply chain.
Okay, understood. Well put. Um, in looking at the supply chain, unfortunately, it took a global pandemic to get people to really know the inner workings of the supply chain, if you will. And fortunately, the pandemic is now firmly in the rear view mirror. But with that said, uh, how do you think the role of the supply chain professional has changed perhaps over the last 4-ish years, going back to the onset of the pandemic, aside from, the raised profile of supply chain in general?
Well, supply chain as a whole, and I'm speaking about professionals in the supply chain, whether you're transacting or giving technology services or providing, insights on how to lean out your supply chain or become more resilient, all of this, what's come out of it is that um, there's a great reset inside of this. All right. So the reset coming out of COVID put us in a place where things that were talked about and few companies studied and understood, now more of us are. So we are looking for value added redundancies. We're looking for modes of resiliency and opportunities for resiliency by collaborating deeper with our service providers. There's been a shift in those inside of that ecosystem of, if you will, service provider and BCO or shipper.
Yeah.
It's been required because the old trusted relationship I had may not be the one I need in the future, because you may not have the ability to do what I need. On the sourcing professional side and procurement, probably the biggest change has occurred there, and here's why. So we learned what multi-service providers provide from a benefit perspective. We also learned that if we didn't understand the pipeline feeding those multi-service providers that I purchased from, I might have crippled my own organization by not having that knowledge and created the necessary transparency. Case in point is, you think about a 3-part program that was put together involving 3 different service providers to provide the same commodity. In the end, that middle distribution was buying from the same manufacturing plant. All of them were. So when that manufacturing plant shut down, what you thought you had in balance, 3 different sources all dried up the same way, because they were all buying from the same factory to supply you the same part. So the sourcing business inside of supply chain has changed dramatically, and it has driven the chief supply chain strategy. It has also driven the CEO strategy, because it's a top to top conversation now, more so than ever, about transparency and the risks and also the resiliency that you can create for my organization. Transportation has changed. Everybody has shifted the way we look at business. Our public-private partnership, and I want to get this point across, and I don't mean to draw this out, Jeff, too long, but I'm just going to say that CSCMP has taken an active position, not in advocacy. We are not a lobby organization, but because we have an abundance of research and unbiased product, we are now supplying that to our federal officials. We want them to make better informed decisions. I was personally involved with Jeff Gold from NRF and other organizations to help resolve the East Coast Challenge, the West Coast Challenge, and the railroads by making sure the president was paying attention, right? So public-private partnership is really important, and the things that we do today have really shifted. So that's a part of what we're thinking about on the road ahead as well, is how do we influence? So the whole ecosystem of supply chain and the way we work with one another has shifted in a different way. And that's also created a different learning environment and a
Yes.
need for different information.
Okay, that's terrific. Great feedback there. And, I just wanted to touch upon a few key themes that I certainly picked up on at the conference. Although I was in largely transportation sessions, as I mentioned, the topic of AI, or artificial intelligence, was prevalent. Um, and I'm just curious what you're seeing or hearing from your membership, Mark, simply about the impact of AI on supply chain operations, perhaps both now and into the future. How do you view that from the CSCMP purview, if you will?
Our members tell us this is very real, and as much as we can learn and as fast as we can, please give it to us. That's number one. So we're on the forefront of doing that, whether it's articles we publish in our magazine, Supply Chain Exchange, or it's the research that we do, the connected tissues of our organization, webinars, et cetera. We're doing it as much as we can. And of course, there was a fair amount of it at Edge that was presented by Carney and Google and others. This is very real. and the opportunities for supply chain to become that much more efficient and effective at what we do in satisfying consumer demand, right product, right place, demand forecasting, as well as, improving that, and just, the whole machinery aspect of predicting analytics and when something's going to fail, all these kind of things. I mean, it's limitless. It is the coolest thing. I hear people talk about the risks associated with it, and there's always bad actors. And you know what? Shame on them. Shame on them. But I don't want to dwell on that. What I mean by bad actors is those that will turn around and use this to steal, and, the things of cybersecurity concerns, and we could go on about that. But the evolving technology inside of supply chain now, we've taken a quantum leap. I mean, there's a complete reset that just raises the bar here with artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're now starting to see learning robotics as a part of assembly lines. I mean, humanoids, right?
Yeah.
And the vast improvement in their ability to even power up and stay powered. It's incredible what's happening. So this is going to change supply chain dramatically into the future, and it's going to lead to levels of efficiency. But I'll say this, the human will not be replaced. The human role will change, but it will not be replaced.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting takeaway there. Absolutely. Another key theme I picked up on, and I've been writing about quite a bit for more than a few months, is simply the increased presence of cross-border logistics and operationally speaking, and manufacturing wise too, between the United States and Mexico. Um, Obviously, it's fair to say, to borrow a baseball term, now that we're almost at the World Series, there's still kind of in the early innings, if you will. How do you sort of view what's happening there as we view the U.S. Mexico sort of emergence interaction?
But let me first by saying that we call this the global supply chain for a reason, and that is we're global. And where we can create a better pattern of success for society, we're going to aspire to achieve that. And the reshoring effort in Mexico is alive and well, and it's very strong. And there's a lot of people working to enable that, and there's a good reason for it. There's an abundant workforce. It brings technology and manufacturing much closer to the United States, if that's the market they want to serve. And it also enhances the economy of Mexico, and it gives business a lot of latitude. So the USMCA, formerly NAFTA, allows a
Yep.
lot of this to happen, right? Mexico's now the #1 exporter to the United States. It will be again 2 years in a row. It was last year in 23. It will be again in 24. And a lot of reasons for that. So our members are actively taking part in this at many different levels. We see and hear about the move to go to Mexico for these very reasons. And I don't think it's over, and it's going to continue to grow. And part of this has been driven by a shift out of China into Mexico, where
Hmm.
manufacturing has become more near sourced, right? As well as the tariff-free benefit of producing genuine origin goods that come within the USMCA community of countries between Canada, the US, and Mexico. So I look for this to continue, but it's hot right now. It certainly is.
No, 100%. And just two quick ones to wrap up here, Mark. One being, what things will you be paying close attention to in the supply chain heading into 2025?
Well,
Yeah.
first and foremost, we're a short 4 weeks away, not even 3 weeks away from an election.
Yep.
And I don't think either party will shift in a large way, the tariff patterns that we see in place that were put in place by the previous Trump administration and upheld by the Biden administration as
Yes.
we look at a Trump-Harris scenario. So you can expect those to stay for a period of time. Where I also think there's a need for businesses to keep a really close eye on what's being said and will be done, because it's likely to happen. So there's areas of perhaps watch outs. We just talked about the reshoring initiative into Mexico. Part of that might be peeled back just a bit if USMCA becomes renegotiated. So that's an area to watch. But I'd say the geopolitical landscape is first and foremost very important on a world stage, not just the US and Mexico, but on the world stage as a whole, as we look at the superpowers, the actions those superpowers are taking on the global landscape, and the protection of the supply chain to do things it needs to do, the freedom to operate. So I think the second piece will be thinking hard and fast and continuing to do it regarding resiliency. And that is, how do we protect what we need to protect in the supply chain so that we can continue to do the things we need to do? And that's a mouthful, and it's different by industry and it's different by company, but
Yeah.
resiliency will be a big deal. I'd say the third piece is the economy, inflation, and cash availability for investment. And then a fourth will be the introduction of further new technologies along the front of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And fifth, and not necessarily in this order, underneath the geopolitical. Geopolitical, I do think, weighs heavily, right? But finally would be just talent and the upskilling of talent and the continual work on developing talent. And that's why CSCMP exists, and we're here to help everyone do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of answered a lot of the things I was in a way for final question, but I think it still is valid just in terms of if we were to look out say 3 to 5 years, Mark, what would be some of the big things or efforts or initiatives within the supply chain that you would like to see underway or at least being heavily considered or discussed at that point? I know that technology probably weighs heavily into those things, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
So let's conclude this way. If it's not apparent and if it's not visible yet, I think everyone on this listening to this conversation should try to access the latest report that we just released on the electrification of the supply chain and a path forward to achieving success. On the future and the road ahead, we're going to have an increasing amount of dependency on the electrification of the supply chain. And that comes in many forms, from EVs and autonomous vehicles to robotics to the use of artificial intelligence, powering operations. You know, we build these large warehouses and they're continuing to grow everywhere. And many key logistics hubs, we need power for that, right? In our very existence, we even need electricity to run electricity. So I'd say that the evolution of what's going to happen in supply chain will create further demand as we think about technologies on a broader scale. Super exciting time for supply chain. So definitely, 3 to 5 years from now, I see a higher level of humanoids and robotics and cobots working alongside of humans in manufacturing, more so than we ever have. I also see a lot more evolving in terms of the vehicles that are carrying goods to consumers and between manufacturers and distribution centers, including the electrification of those vehicles, but also we're going to figure out how to use things in an autonomous way. It may not be a whole shift, but we're going to see more of it, and there's a place for it. So we're figuring out safety. We're figuring out a lot of things in this area, and that technology is going to continue to evolve. And then finally, just the things that we make in a more sustainable way. We do care about the environment. And rather than just environmental activism, I would rather see us all be, environmental proponents and doing the right things right for society. And that's going to continue to accelerate because two things. One is people are watching and the consumer has that expectation and it's not going to go away. So that's my crystal ball. And that's the
Yeah,
number one reason for continuous learning, Jeff, is you can't sit still. We're moving at a high rate of speed. And
100%.
leaders and practitioners have to continue to learn as we grow.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. Well, listen, Mark, that brings us to the end of our allotted time for today's podcast. So, on behalf of Logistics Management Magazine and also the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group, I'd like to offer up a big thanks to you for spending some time with us today. Um, and for those of you that are on Twitter, feel free to give CSCMP a follow, simply at CSCMP. And also, please feel free to give us at Logistics Management a follow, simply at Logistics MGMT. And if you're not subscribed to our podcast, please go ahead and do so wherever you get your podcast. Just go ahead and search for Supply Chain 24/7, and it should pop right up. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a great day.